Bob Huebscher, and this is the Gaining Perspective podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with some of the top thought leaders in the investment advisor profession and investment management industry. I am the founder of Advisor Perspectives and a vice chairman of VettaFi. We're speaking on November 3rd, but the big headline for 2023 has already been written. This will be the year of artificial intelligence and machine learning, AI and ML. Not only have AI and ML driven the soaring valuations of stocks like NVDIA, they've also demonstrated the potential to increase the efficiency of advisory practices. My guest today will provide an update on the latest in AI ML and how solutions such as ChatGPT will positively impact financial professionals. Prepare to be informed, inspired, and equipped with the knowledge to navigate the exciting horizons that lie ahead. Clayton Chandler is the Chief Security, Privacy, and Data Officer at Osaic. Osaic was formerly known as Advisor Group prior to its rebranding earlier this year. So, Clayton, let's start off by having you tell me about your career path and what led you to Osaic and a little more about your role there.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thanks for having me. Very happy to be here talking about this topic, and will do my best to make it inspirational as the introduction talked about. It's been an interesting ride. So, quick background on me. From Louisiana, I kind of grew up as a computer scientist. Got my PhD in what is now called data science, but back then we called it computational analysis. And started my career in the government space, working with national labs, intelligence agencies, the Defense Department, doing all sorts of high performance computing for different kind of physical sciences like chemistry and biology, and then moving into things like anti-terrorism, cryptanalysis, and then kind of interestingly in 2014, I had the opportunity to come to New York and work at a very large bank in the role of chief data scientist. And that really exposed me to kind of large scale financial data, kind of all the things that go along with analyzing it. So I did that job for a couple of years, and then realized that my real passion really is the combination of data and security and protecting our systems and protecting, in the case of Osaic, our advisors. So kind of moved into that role, leading both the data science team and the cybersecurity team for a large bank. Had the opportunity to join Osaic just around 2 years ago. And after working on the banking side for a number of years, the opportunity to move into the independent space, really understand the differences in this world, and really help our independent advisors was really attractive to me. So I've been in this role, leading security, privacy, and data at Osaic for the past 2 years, and couldn't be happier.
Let's define what the topic is for today's discussion. What is artificial intelligence?
Well, that's really the question, isn't it? So one thing that I've kind of discovered this year is I've been doing various road shows. We had our large annual conference 2 weeks ago, and this was exactly one of the topics, is just demystifying what is AI, what are we talking about. From a mathematical perspective, you can think of AI as a very, very large field of study. So when we use terms like machine learning, data analytics, generative AI, these are all subsets of the broader field called artificial intelligence. And if you look over the past 50 years, as humans have gotten better at solving certain problems, what will ultimately happen is those problems will move out of the field of what's called artificial intelligence and into other fields like engineering or science. And a really, really good example of this is a chess simulation, or more recently, a Go simulation. So for decades and decades and decades, the ability to train a computer to beat a human at chess was considered artificial intelligence, up until around the 70s, when it became scientifically possible. And now, we don't even think about it. Of course, your computer can beat you at chess. Or voice recognition is another really, really good example. For decades, it was AI. It was hey, we're kind of stretching the abilities of technology. And now we don't even think about voice recognition when we're pushing the button on our phone to ask Siri to do something. So think of AI as a very large container for hard scientific and mathematical problems that we're trying to teach computers, and then think of all these other topics like machine learning and generative AI as a subset of that field.
Why is it such a big deal now?
Again, that's the other question. And in my opinion, if you look over the past 10 years, three things have come together to make this a big deal. Number one, rising computing power. No real surprise if anyone's ever heard of something called Moore's Law. Again, dating back decades, Moore's Law basically says that computing power doubles every 18 months. Now that's maybe tapered off a little bit more recently because you can only go so fast in terms of the real gains in computing power are driven by just making things smaller and smaller and smaller at the microprocessor level. But the point is, computers are infinitely more powerful now than they were in the recent past. And that form factor that computer comes in, if you think about in your head, you're imagining these big, football-sized field supercomputers. It's not really what they're doing these days. These are running on individual chips. And just the amount of power that we have at our disposal. So number one, lots and lots of computer power. Number two, the cloud. So sure, maybe we've always had very large computers that can do AI. In my kind of history, maybe about 20 years ago, I was working at a national lab working on some old code from the 60s, and that code had AI in it. But we had access to a multi-million-dollar supercomputer. Well, nowadays, you take the first thing, which is these very, very powerful computers running on graphics processor units. You take the second thing, which is the cloud. So now it's all in the cloud. Anyone, anywhere can, pay their subscription fee and subscribe and run their AI models. And then the third thing, almost exactly a year ago to the day, was the release of ChatGPT. So you slam those three things together. You got a lot of computing power. You got the ability to use the cloud to model it, kind of democratizing the access. And then you've got ChatGPT, which is, hey, how do you expose all of that to the user? Well, it's the obvious answer. You make it a chatbot. So now you've got a chatbot wired up to the cloud that can use massively parallel computers to do very, very interesting things. And if you slam all three of those things together, again, especially over the past year, that's really where this is coming from. And it's allowed people to experiment, test, try new things. And as we've seen, it's led to an explosion in AI capability.
Let's pick up on that last point. Why has ChatGPT been so impactful?
So ChatGPT, just for those folks that don't know just how impactful it has been, one of the fascinating data points that I've been tracking is it is the most viral, fastest adopted piece of software or piece of technology maybe that we've ever seen. If you're listening to this and you're not using ChatGPT, I can almost guarantee you, if you've got teenage kids, they are using ChatGPT. It's gotten to over 200 million users in the past calendar year. That's faster than TikTok. That's faster than Facebook. It's faster than Twitter. It's faster than anything we've ever seen. So why is that? Again, going back to the days of football field size supercomputers and scientists in white trench coats and people trying to figure out how to use AI. The question was always, how do you expose it to the masses? The masses aren't going to write incredibly complex programming language code. What do you do? And OpenAI, who created ChatGPT, and others in the scientific field. I mean, there are other tools like ChatGPT, but obviously this was the one that went viral. They solved the question in the most obvious way possible. And that was just expose it as a chatbot, expose it as a search, expose it as a conversation. But backing it up is incredibly complex AI technology. And yes, of course, making it free to access, at least for the, what they call ChatGPT 3.5 version of it. And so, that ability to have it in the cloud where anyone can access it, make it free, but also make it a chatbot, hide all the complexity and just make it a conversation. In my opinion, that's really what led to the rapid rise in adoption.
Talk about generative AI. What is it? What is it good at?
So generative AI uses something called a large language model. Again, going back to the beginning of the conversation, it's one of those subfields of AI. Really starting in 2012, there was a team out of the University of Toronto that used what at the time were called deep neural networks to solve the problem of as with all things, recognizing pictures of cats. So, imagine, hey, 11 years ago, we're at the University of Toronto with some PhD students, and we say, hey, how do we train a neural network to recognize pictures of cats? Because it's the internet, and this is what we do. And you fast forward 11 years later, and here we are. So generative AI uses layers of neural networks and trains it with a large language model to basically convert text into mathematics. So imagine that you take generative AI and you do what we call train it. You just train it on the internet. You feed it Wikipedia, you feed it social media, you feed it as much text as you can possibly feed it. That generative AI model takes that text, converts it to a bunch of math, and then basically when you ask it a question, if you can kind of think about it mathematically, it looks for how, the quote unquote closest answer to your question. So you can kind of imagine you've got a sentence. It kind of classifies that words in a sentence, kind of 1 to 10. You ask it a question. The math says, hey, that's a 7, and converts it back to the text. There's a lot going on under the hood, but one of the important things to understand is it's not any smarter mathematically than any AI that we've ever had. It's really, really good at some things. It's good at taking text and summarizing it, translating it between styles, helping you look up items in large documents. As we've also seen, it can paint pictures, it can create art. So it's very good at kind of taking a large amount of data and producing something simple. But importantly, it's not any more factually accurate than previous AI. It has these things called hallucinations. And this is kind of one of the really, really important things that we teach our advisors about AI. If you think about kind of science historically, it's really important that you get the right answer. So you might remember 10 years ago, IBM Watson was trained to win Jeopardy. And in that model, that's a completely different branch of AI. And in that model, you better be right if you're trying to win Jeopardy. Watson was later used in the health industry to help doctors diagnose patients. Again, you better get the right answer. And one of the really, really key things that we, when my advisors ask me about AI, that is not how generative AI works. And this is really, really important. So the way generative AI works is it's what we call probabilistic. It's trained to give you an answer. If you ask it a question, it will give you an answer. It will not necessarily give you the correct answer. And if it doesn't know the answer, it might just make up an answer. And so if you have a problem where accuracy is incredibly important, you would not use generative AI. But if you have a problem where, let's say you're trying to create a document and you just need something that's 80% accurate to get started with, and you'll edit it later, it could be an email, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be a PowerPoint document. That's really where generative AI shines. It's very, very good at getting you started, creating something that's pretty close to correct, but it's not any better. And in fact, it's far worse at accuracy when you compare it to a lot of the other technology that we have access to today.
So given that its strength lies in getting you started, but not necessarily in arriving at a precise answer, where have you seen the most positive impact of this technology for financial advisors?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it has been around communications. When you think about things like marketing, again, working obviously with not only our partners here in compliance from a marketing standpoint, but also some of the technology partners that are out there that provide those capabilities. Communications with clients, summarizing large complex documents. This is another really, really good example. So let's say, for example, you've got a mass communication that you want to send out to your client base, maybe due to some recent change in regulation, or you've got a highly technical piece of information, and the problem you're trying to solve is, how do I get this very technical information or document out to what might not be a very technical audience? So for example, let's say you're trying to work with a relatively new client and you're working with them on how to set a risk appetite on a 1 through 5 scale. And that potentially can get very complex financially. Let's say you're working with a 82-year-old retiree, and you'd like to translate that and generate an email that says, hey, please generate an email to an 80-year-old retiree that summarizes how to set a risk appetite on a 1 through 5 scale, or how summarizes how to set your investment goals on a 1 through 5 scale. That kind of thing, where you've got an existing piece of information that's maybe well known, like a risk appetite, or you've got a specific document that outlines a lot of technical detail, and you're trying to translate that to a different audience. Those are the types of things where generative AI really shines. Another really good personal example of this has nothing to do with finances, but about a month ago, I took my kids to Cooperstown, to New York, to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And my 7-year-old is a baseball fanatic. And as 7-year-olds do, we're getting ready to go to the Hall of Fame, and he's asking me a lot of questions. He's asking me about, Babe Ruth. He's asking me about Lou Gehrig. And so one of the things that I did is say, hey, ChatGPT, take the Wikipedia article on Babe Ruth and translate that to the style of a 7-year-old boy. And the style of a 7-year-old boy is lots of exclamation points, words like awesome and cool. And it did it. And it did an incredibly good job at it. And it did a good job at it, number one, because this kind of summarization is what ChatGPT is really good at. And number two, there's a lot of information out there on Babe Ruth. So that the chance of it kind of doing what I said earlier and getting something wrong is relatively low. So, in the past 6 months, when I've been working with our advisors, and they're either currently using these types of tools or kind of thinking about their use cases, how might they use it? A lot of that, tailoring your communications to the audience seems to be where a lot of people are starting.
There's a question that I've asked some other experts about AI, and I want to get your opinion on this as well. What are the limits of artificial intelligence? What are the tasks that will be forever solvable only by humans and won't ever be conquered by AI?
Well, first off, forever is a long time, but I'll define forever as based on the current the current limits of research that I've seen. Hopefully, over the past 10 minutes or so, I've convinced you at least a little bit that, relatively speaking, generative AI is still pretty primitive. Again, for as amazing as it is, and it really can do some incredible things in creating documents, summarizing documents, creating art, it's not any smarter than current science, to the fact. And it's also in its infancy. What we're not talking about here is, we'll use the term AGI, or kind of a true, kind of widely available, quote unquote, true human artificial intelligence with things like emotion. That is still a very, very long ways away, if ever. We have a lot of discussions across our advisor base of the threat versus the opportunity, specifically of generative AI. And broadly speaking, not only at Osaic, but if you look at industry experts in financial services, industry experts that are leading large technology organizations, and you ask them that question of, insofar as we can see into the future. So again, I'm not going to say the word forever, 10, 20 years from now, based on this technology, generative AI, are we really augmenting the advisor or replacing the advisor? The vast majority of not only experts but advisors that we work with are on the camp of augmenting, and are frankly really, really excited about using the technology. So I personally believe that the role of advisor, in that role as a life coach, and in that role as empathizing and working with their clients, that's not going anywhere. And in fact, that's only going to get more important as more of the mundane, transactional parts of the role, move into being helped out by AI. So if you think about, if you move in kind of, we would use the word structured data. So if you're moving into the world of, portfolio optimization, asset management, performance tracking, kind of that world that we all know very well, that structured world, and more of that becomes, look, you've got a lot of help there. And your real role is more on the what we call unstructured side of the house, which is the human relationship, the human element, the connection with your client. I personally have not seen anything remotely close in AI research that would kind of intrude into that world. And the things that we do see now, like generative AI, are really going to augment it, not replace it.
You've made a very persuasive case for the benefits of AI. What about the risks? What are the risks that you worry about?
Yeah, a couple of things here, and I'll talk about Osaic's policy when we look at these risks. So the first one is the one that we talked about earlier. Generative AI can flat out get things wrong. And you need to understand that. It's very, very important that everyone understands that. And that really drives kind of two aspects of our current policy as it relates to generative AI and the use of ChatGPT. Number one, and I haven't had to convince a single advisor of this, they all completely get it. Do not put sensitive data or client information in ChatGPT. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's a third-party tool. Even though OpenAI uses the word open, it's actually a for-profit enterprise. So as it relates to that specific generative AI tool, that's rule number one. And there will be a future, and Osaic's kind of rapidly getting towards that future, where generative AI capabilities within our four walls, in a way that can handle sensitive data, is coming. And we're working with partners, such as Microsoft and others on that. But rule number one is risk number one, and therefore rule number one is it can get things wrong. And because it can get things wrong, you don't want to put client data or sensitive data into the tool. And number two, any output that the tool produces needs to be reviewed by a human prior to use for your organization. And again, I've yet to have a conversation with an advisor where they say, what do you mean? I'm not going to check what this thing's producing. Going back to that, again, those hallucinations that I talked about. So that's risk number one. Risk number one is, look, it can produce wrong answers, so make sure you check your homework. And ChatGPT specifically is a third-party tool, and just like any other third-party tool on the internet, do not put sensitive data in it. Now, there's some other risks too. When we think about the usage of generative AI. So as we talked about in the introduction, one of my other jobs is running cybersecurity for the firm. And if you put that hat on for a minute, and you think about the fact that, look, the bad guys also have access to this capability. And we talk about this a lot with our advisors. So if you think about things like phishing emails or socially engineering emails, well, as we just talked about, ChatGPT and generative AI are very, very good at creating emails. So that definitely increases the risk of more, let's use the term, real looking and targeted things like phishing emails or business email compromise attacks on our advisors, and working with all of our cybersecurity vendors to kind of play that cat and mouse game. So as AI gets better, our defenses have to get better. AI makes an improvement, our defenses have to make improvements. And then you think about things like maybe looking longer term. Some of the longer term risks that we're tackling are things like potential voice spoofing. And what does that mean for some of our controls? If you think about things like a callback verification, there's a whole industry working group working on that. So there are some longer term risks that we're not really seeing materialize yet, but we know are scientifically possible. But the real near term risk, and I can't, I know, Bob, I've been saying this a lot, I can't kind of, for as good as it is at summarizing and producing content, it can just flat out get stuff wrong. And that's the big risk to watch out for.
I asked you earlier about forever. Let's just look now at 5 or so years from now. What do you think the biggest impacts will be of this technology in the advisory profession?
That's a fantastic question, because I don't think this is science fiction. I think you're actually going to see this sooner rather than later. The biggest impact is going to be on productivity. Let me give you a few examples of this. So let's say, for example, you're a financial advisor and you do what we do, and you're working with a spreadsheet. Maybe it's a pretty complex spreadsheet across your entire advisor base. And maybe you've got several hundred rows, a few dozen columns. And your ask is, what you really want to do is, hey, look, just summarize the top 3 or 4 insights that are in the spreadsheet and take the next step. I want to take those 3 or 4 insights. I want to create a 5-page PowerPoint slide, because I'm going to be showing this to people, that kind of highlights and summarizes those insights and kind of gives a debriefing on what's going on in this data, and take the next step, draft an email that captures that summary so I can send it out to people. Now, again, to kind of go back to our theme here, is that going to be 100% correct when you look at the 3 or 4 insights that are created, the PowerPoint that's created, the email that's created? No. There's still that job for you as the human to do that review and to get that kind of last 15 to 20% finishing touch on those documents. But imagine the time savings of that entire workflow front to back. If instead of staring at a blank draft email, you're staring at something that's been drafted, and it's actually pretty good. And imagine kind of day to day how often we all as professionals go through that workflow of, translating something from one document to another, creating a communication from scratch. That's really what you're going to see. I would say not in the next 5 years, but really over the next 12 months, because those technologies are on the way now through a lot of the vendors that all of our advisors are currently using. And so, if I were to put one word on it, I would say the focus is on productivity, and just like getting those things in a position where you're starting with something rather than starting from scratch.
If there's one key takeaway that you'd like to leave with our audience of advisors about how they should weigh the risks against the benefits of using artificial intelligence, what would that be?
The first thing I would like to leave the audience with is, I know, look, I'm a technologist. Technologists can get very excited about things. And I know advisors have heard maybe hype like this before. The expert systems 10 years ago were going to change our lives. And a few years ago, the blockchain was going to change our lives. And a couple of years ago, the metaverse was going to change our lives. And maybe, there's a few folks listening to this that go, oh, this is just the next one of those. This whole generative AI thing is just the next technologist buzzword. The first thing I want to leave the audience with is I don't think that's true. I think the proof is in the pudding. If you look at the technology that's here now, if you look at the adoption rates, generative AI is not science fiction, and it really will change the way we work. Again, in my opinion, in a positive way over the next 5 years. And the second thing I would leave the audience with is, look, it's like the old saying says, with great power comes great responsibility. It's fascinatingly good at some things, but it's not any smarter. And so use the technology to your advantage, but understand that you as the human, look, you're still in control, and you're still accountable, and you're still the one managing the relationship with your client. And use it as a tool in the toolbox. You will find ways to use it to be more productive, but it's not going to replace what you do. And the onus is still on you to take what it produces and make sure that that's in the best interest of you and your client.
Thank you. We will leave a link to the Osaic public-facing website in the notes that accompany this podcast. Content is regularly added to it, and you can check back frequently to see what new information is there about cybersecurity, privacy, and data protection. Clayton, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you again for the opportunity.
You're welcome, and thank you for listening to the Gaining Perspective podcast with Bob Huebscher, today featuring Clayton Chandler of Osaic. To support our podcast, please share, subscribe, or leave a review to help make our podcast more findable for your friends and colleagues. You can subscribe to Gaining Perspective on your favorite podcasting service.